See what's there.
I was thinking, when we were outside painting this morning, and Frank asked me how long I've been doing this. And I forget how, was this the 27th or 29th year that we had juried show? So I'm thinking, well, it's my 29th year. I've been doing it ever since. And I remember the very first one, I think there was 10 people. And they were all the instructors here. I think they were sizing me up to see if we should really keep this guy or not. So I think since we've had such a beautiful winter, ice and snow, and I thought I would do a icy, snowy landscape. I'll get started, and as I start thinking, I'll explain a little bit as I go along. I have something in mind, but just getting started. I've painted a lot in Vermont, not of recent, but certainly some wonderful memories of the Manchester area. So I thought I would do something like that. And since I'm fortunate enough to look out of my window across the lake, and I can see the ice on the trees and the snow and so forth, with those observations, I'd like to share some of those experiences. And I'm going to proceed as if we were standing on location. And that brings to the question, what is the difference between standing on location painting and studio painting? Of course, the biggest difference is when you have something that's in front of you in sunlight, and in this case the ice and the snow and everything, and the sunlight is going to change quite quickly. So you're in a rush to try and get the overall effect down. And it is different when you're inside composing and creating. I mean, ultimately, at the end of our life's experiences, we would like to face a blank canvas and recreate some of what we know. And it also makes us think more. And so that now the conception of the painting becomes more important than the execution. What are you going to do? And what are you thinking about? And in the classes here, what we're teaching and what was given to me was the education and the tools, such as this palette, to be creative, and we learn that really it's the light from the sky that gives the earth its meaning. And I remember when Arthur first said that, I didn't quite understand. But in the years to come, you certainly realize that when you study and look at all the other painters before us, and you see what they all had in common, that's what they were thinking. And they were thinking how to bring their canvas to life. And our education is not so much the mechanics of painting, but the overall light effect, whether we're painting inside or outside, or no matter what we're painting. So with a little of this, and now, some years later, you'll see some of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to proceed by painting the shadows of the things first. There will be a stream and some snow and some ice on the mountains. There will be somewhat of some subject in here, trees in the distance, and that. And we always try and paint as directly as possible. However, in the beginning, it seems a little bit more abstracted in that it doesn't seem so direct. But by painting the shadows with some gray paint and a little of the blue from the sky, we're really painting the nature of the shadow outside. So that when you think of shade, and that the sun can never get into the shadow, the only thing that illuminates the shadow is the blue sky. So consequently, with that principle, that's what we'll begin with. And then in the sunlight, it'll be a little bit more direct. one of the observations we make is that when you have ice and thin snow on the trees in the mountains, it tends to look a little bit darker, and there's a warmer tone to it because there's a lot of the twigs and the branches that show through. Versus the sunlight or the flat plane of the snow, where it's more compacted, and you're not seeing the transparency quite as much. It becomes more opaque. So the flat planes become a little bit lighter than the upright plane. The other thing that helps make a painting convincing is proving the direction of the light. So in this picture, the sunlight's going to be coming from the left. So the progression of the sky will be lighter as it gets to the sun. A little bit yellower in color, especially after the clearing of one of those wintry storms. The sun hitting some of the remaining snow showers cast some of the yellower tones on it. So some of the tree lines in the back here, you'll see a little bit of warmth in it, but for the time being, still in the throes of the shadow. And the tree line we talk about the unity in nature, the unity especially when you look at the shadow, whether the building is red or brown or green, or the trees are green, or whatever the local color may be, to get the unity and the overall oneness in the painting, if we start with just the basic principle of natural law of atmosphere and the blue sky, and with that understanding, no matter what color the subject is in the beginning, the value and the nature of the color may prevail in the beginning. And there will be a winding brook going through in here. But I think before that we'll start with some of the sky. And I think a cloud behind the mountain just to, after the snow showers and ice have just left. Not much color yet, is there? can certainly see the progression in the sky going away from the sun. Probably the hardest thing when you're outside is to try and figure out, well, how dark do I make something, or how light do I make something? And that's where just a lot of practice and experience comes in. Probably the best thing that happened to me was stumbling across a great teacher who had the patience. As many times as he walked down the stairs shaking his head, he never gave up. So, and I say it every year, what made me start was when I was 18, watching him paint a demonstration that was magical. It was bigger than this, and I was just of the most fortunate person to catch him at the end of a lifetime of experience. And he gave me this palette, which was given to him by his teacher. And from his teacher, who learned it at the French academies, and a lot of thinking on their own that went into it. And I wish I could take credit for it, but I'm not that smart. But certainly they've given us the tools to carry on. And this is what we do at the Ridgewood Art Institute. We just carry on. So with that in mind, and a palette of a lot of values, if you were to look at it for the first time, you would be just as confused as I was when I first saw it. But with a lot of patience and understanding, and piles of wiped off canvases of very frustrating times, eventually you start seeing it. And then it's, you just don't stop. It's just so exciting. I've been painting in that park for my whole life, and this morning it was just as inspiring as it was right in the beginning. A little bit of the stream. And we all know that the streams in the winter are quite dark. The cold water and the ice kind of kills off everything, all the vegetation. You see a lot of the dark bottom that comes through. So it does help the snow scenes because it gives a lot of contrast. There's so much to explain and there's so much to tell. I'm leaving out a lot because I stay here all day, but all the elliptical curves that are outside, all those wonderful nuances that you start to catch on after the initial beginning when you're trying to figure out what mixes what to get this. But once you understand the mechanics of how to mix the color, then you start seeing a little bit further. You start seeing a little bit more and a little bit more. And you know that the landscape is never as flat as a tabletop, and there's those subtle elliptical curves that weave in and out through the entire landscape. And along the edge of the stream, you get some of the brush and the grasses that come through. Translucency of some of the ice. Now we start to put a little of the ice on the branches and the bushes. You've all seen this when we've been kids, and you wake up in the morning and you look out the window and you see every little branch just covered. The other thing is also when we're studying outside, we find that white in general, white house, white snow, recedes into the distance, getting ever so slightly darker. So that your whitest white is usually in the foreground, and as it recedes off into the distance, it gets a little bit darker. The color perspective from the foreground to the distance is something as bright as white and orange, or white and a little yellow, and as it goes back, it loses that yellow prismatically, and you gain orange and red and so forth as it goes back. Now when you have ice and snow on the mountains, it picks up a little bit more of those warmer red tones to begin with. All right, so that gives us a chance. get something in the distance, but at the same time, it'll still be darker than what's going to happen in the front. And there's something that in class we talk about right away, and it's called halftone. Halftone means it's half the light and half the shadow, but it does give form, and that's why you really need it. So that the halftone between the light and the shadow is what's going to start giving these trees some form. Problem is, mountain's getting bigger as it can't quite get the end of it right. Now as the sunlight comes closer, right, it's going to get a little bit brighter as it comes closer. The white become a little bit fresher. So the tops of the tree line, as the sun hits the tops, start to come up a little lighter. But again, because it's ice and light snow, the values end up being a little bit closer together. The values, so they're not, it may start out a little bit light, but by the time all the half-toning takes place, thing I was thinking of, I thought of it coming down, and I just realized that a lot of those mountains in Vermont have all those pine trees that have some thick pockets of shadow, which will help break open the space on the mountain here. Well, you'd never know by that building that I used to be an architectural illustrator. But it's probably going to fall down anyway. Whenever I do these things, I always think what it was like a long time ago when we first started painting. And I think it's just human nature for us all to see the obvious things, to see the sticks and to see the leaves and to see the highlights and the darks. But our training and all the years that we really study, it's all those in-betweens. That's what we really study and concentrate on. So we haven't had any highlights in, and we haven't had any dark accents in. And certainly there's a dearth of color in here, but that could come. But you can certainly see after a short amount of time the essence of the light effect, which is the thing that is the most important part of the painting. All the great masters and all the great landscape painters, they've all concentrated on that. Some have done it better than others. But if your aim is true all the way to the end, I mean, you judge the paintings, I mean, you certainly admire Rembrandt's paintings and Sargent's and all those others. But the thing of it is that you admire their direction the most, that they never wavered.
In the foreground, does it mean that there's a cloud outside the picture frame too?
Yeah, the clouds also overhead and behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is right after, yes. Certainly when we talk about our darkest accents, meaning the darkest values, for those that, of us that paint, they do occur in the foreground, and they always follow the action of the light as it goes through the picture. So in other words, more than likely you wouldn't put your darkest dark in the background, because it just doesn't sit there. All right? And you probably wouldn't put it down in the corner because peripherally you can't see that dark. So it goes in how it's going to help your picture the most. So even though this looked quite bright in the back here in the beginning, it starts to come closer so that you can start to see where the sunlight starts to happen. And to now and then see some of nature's inspirational moments is what really, I think, keeps us all painting, because it's just a magnificent thing to see, and the more we paint, the more we see it. question. The shadow is basically a gray with some blue in it, and the sunlight has the it's probably got the full range of the spectrum depending on where it is. Maybe that's enough for now.
Not bad for now.